Now that you have thought about what an entire planning with data session looks like, we want to dig further into each of the data buckets. So as you know, you're going to organize your data into the following four buckets: quality practices, attendance and participation, youth outcomes, and club experiences. Some of these data buckets are a bit more evident as to all of the various ways that you can collect this data. Some of these we need to think through a little bit more. In this session, we are going to think through the various ways that we can collect each of the following buckets of data. So for quality practices, this is data that, as you know, represents any data source that assesses the quality of staff practice at your club. The most common examples that we see used at clubs is the YPQA, or Youth Program Quality Assessment, and the other program quality assessments that come from the Weichert Center for Youth Program Quality, such as the School Age PQ or the STEM PQ. We also see the Assessment of Program Practices tool, or the APTO, and the Quality Mentoring Assessment Path, QMAP. Quality practices are really going to live in these types of assessments. These are often observational, and they really look at what are the staff actually doing to ensure the positive experience of the young people. So quality practices, when we think about those, we're just going to think about this is any data that we collect that tells us about the practices our staff are using and how well they are using those practices. So quality practices is one of those that it is a little bit more straightforward as long as you have one of these verified observational assessment tools, such as those listed on the screen before you. Next up, we're going to think about attendance and participation. And attendance and participation is one that is often thought of as straightforward. It tells you who is coming to your club and how often. Generally, what we see is people bring their overall club attendance. They might bring program participation, demographic information, and then some frequency of attendance and retention information. This is an area where I really want you to think about all of the various ways that you can look at attendance and participation and think about what that can tell you. So if you think back to the Planning with Data overview that you just listened to, what we're trying to do is put together all of the data that we have to get a complete story of what is happening inside of our clubs and inside of our programs. If we bring overall club attendance, that's great, but it's not really telling us much about how our programs or our program practices are impacting our attendance and retention. Some of the ways to think about this are within program participation, think about program specific attendance, and then think about demographic breakdown within that. So if you're pulling your program specific attendance for your summer brain gain program, let's say, and then you can look at it within each demographic. So then I could look at, in summer brain gain, how many 13-year-old girls are starting out in the program, and then by the end of the program, how many do we have left? So what we're seeing there is program participation and retention for specifically 13-year-old girls in our summer brain gain program. If we know that that is low, we can think about what are those staff practices that we looked at that might help increase the engagement, the attendance and retention of our tween girl populations. I also want you to think about frequency of attendance. So not just did they start the program at the beginning and complete the program, but how often did they show up between then? So if this is a 12-week, twice a week program, were they coming every week, twice a week? Were they coming just once a week? Did they come in the beginning and then not again until the end? There's a lot of information that you can gather from looking at your attendance in a variety of ways. You can really go as deep into this as you would like to. As I mentioned, you can pull a couple of specific demographics. I talked about gender and age. You could also look at race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status, any available demographic that you have, information that you have. If you are collecting that, and program participation and frequency of attendance and retention, that you're going to be able to get really granular on who's coming to your programs and who's continuing to come to your programs. This is going to give you a lot of information about which of your programs are the most effective for which groups. It doesn't mean that every program has to be effective for every group, but if we know summer brain gain is really not working for our tween girls, it's got great attendance and retention for our elementary age boys, that's fantastic. Either let's think about how we can tweak this to make this more accessible for those tween girl populations, or we might not be able to create a program that is really engaging for both of those populations, but we know that we are missing one that engages tween girls. So now the improvement plan is going to be to create a program that specifically engages tween girls. Looking at attendance and participation in a variety of ways is really going to help you get an overall picture of your club. Next up, we're going to look at youth outcomes. So youth outcomes data refers to information your club collects to measure the success of key program indicators. We collect NYOI data, which automatically means that clubs have youth outcomes data. So when you think about NYOI, those questions that are asking young people how they think they will succeed in school and beyond, those are youth outcome measures. In our healthy lifestyles measures, we look at what practices our youth are picking up from their time in the club. Those are youth outcomes. Our good character and citizenship measures as well. So if you think about NYOI, a section of the questions really gets after our 3 priority youth outcomes that is just listed: academic success, healthy lifestyles, and good character and citizenship. The other bucket that we see is how our kids feel about their experience at the club. So when you think about NYOI and youth outcomes, we are not looking at the club experience questions or measures right now. We are only looking at the questions and measures that look at the outcomes: academic success, healthy lifestyles, and good character and citizenship. Additionally, if you use the Survey of Academic and Youth Outcomes Youth Survey, or the SAO-Y, that is also giving you youth outcomes information. Program pre and post tests are going to do the same thing. So for BGCA curriculum, for instance, we have quite a few pre and post tests. For healthy habits, we have a pre-test that assesses the knowledge that our participants are coming in with, and then a post-test that assesses whether or not they have gained the knowledge and skills that we were hoping during that program. So that is assessing our youth outcomes. Are our programs actually moving the dial on getting our youth to the outcomes that we want to see? School attendance, grades, and testing information are also youth outcomes. One of the things that we think about with academic success, right? That's one of our priority outcomes. We know that if we see school attendance increase, our kids are more likely to succeed academically. So seeing the school attendance is going to really tell us a lot about that academic success measure. There are also several NYOI optional modules that will tell you about youth outcomes in a variety of different topics. Next up, we have our club experiences. So club experience data represents information that speaks to how members, parents, and other participants experience your club and the programs or activities within it. So obviously we have our NYOI club experience measures, which tells us a lot about this. So every club is currently collecting at least some club experience data through NYOI. We also have pulse checks. Those help us measure our club experience along the way. NYOI is only once a year, and it's best to look over the year at how we're doing. Pulse checks help us do that. And then we can take all of the pulse check data that we have from the last year and look at that in our Planning with Data workshop. There's also, if you do any polls, listening sessions, or focus groups, those are also telling us about our club experience. Focus groups around how do you feel about the programs that we offer? What do you want to see done differently at the club? Those are all club experience. Program surveys that aren't about what you learned in the program, but are about how you enjoy the program is a club experience. So we can think about in youth outcomes, we talked about the program pre and post tests right here. Those are assessing what did the youth learn during the course of this program. When you think about club experience program surveys, that is assessing how do our kids feel about the programs, not if they learned what we wanted, but did they like it along the way? Were they interested? The NYOI staff survey, that is also club experience. How your staff experiences the club is going to impact how your youth experience the club. If we have happy, engaged staff, they are going to model that for our young people. So when we think about the club experience, we don't just want to think about the youth. We also want to think about the staff. And then the next one is the parents. How is our club meeting the needs of our parents? That is how our families are experiencing the club. So parent surveys are also a big part of that club experience. And then again, if you do SEO, the SEO S and Y, those get after our club experiences as well. So again, some of the SEO looks at youth outcomes, some of the SEO looks at club experiences, much like the NYOI. So the last thing that I'm going to want you to think about is this data collection worksheet. So we just saw all of those 4 types of data, and we talked through the different buckets and what types of data make up those buckets. Now that you know that, look back at this data collection worksheet and think through all of the various ways that you measure each of those data buckets that we just described.